back which supports everything, all those features.
Well, I look forward to it. So. No, restroom.
Oh, restroom, sorry.
Right here? Yeah, perfect.
And I'll get you water.
Okay.
Hey, good morning. How are you? It's live.
All right, everybody.
Yeah.
That's cool. We're going to get started again. I want to make a quick introduction to Scott, longtime friend, colleague, partner, everything. Scott's from Gensler, heads up their visualization unit there globally. And these guys have been using V-Ray for quite some time, and Scott's pretty much on the bleeding edge every day. So I just want to say thanks, Scott, for coming and joining us here today, and from Houston. And I'll just turn it over to Scott.
All right, can you guys hear me okay? All right. Hi, so my name is Scott DeWitty. I am the firm-wide creative media manager at Gensler, which essentially means I'm overseeing all of our rendering technologies for the entire firm. So when it comes to rendering with V-Ray and Revit, Rhino, SketchUp, and Max, to virtual reality, augmented reality, motion graphics, film, photography, that kind of thing, I'm heading that sort of initiative at the firm. Just a little background about myself. I don't actually have an architecture background. I studied illustration in school, so I have an illustration, film, and photography background. I've been at the firm almost 10 years now. I've been doing 3D since about 2000, 2001, and I've been doing V-Ray for about 12 years now. So that's a little background about me. For those of you who don't know, and actually, let me back up real quick. I decided to keep this presentation a little more like high level because I knew these guys here at Chaos Group were going to be throwing a lot of information at you today. So I figured just talking about virtual reality and why you should be using virtual reality and how so. So is anyone here having trouble selling virtual reality at their firm, or is everyone just already dove in? And one guy in the back. Awesome. This is for you. Hopefully, though, you guys do get a little something out of this. So I'm going to start a little high level. We're going to get a little technical, and I'm going to show you some kind of case studies that we've used at Gensler over the past few years with VR. So if you don't know who we were founded back in 1965 by a gentleman named Art Gensler. He opened up a little hole-in-the-wall shop in San Francisco in some alleyway, and about 50-plus years later, we now have 44 offices around the world with about 5,000 employees. And so when I say I'm managing this globally, it's quite an endeavor. But thankfully, we've got a lot of support from our firm in doing a lot of this kind of work. Because we design everything in 3D, right? I mean, this is what we're used to day in and day out. I mean, who doesn't love wireframes, right? And this is pretty much how we do. And then when we want to communicate our idea to a design director or a client or even ourselves, we render it out and try and get it either photoreal or stylized, whatever kind of way or presentation style we're looking for, which is all said and great, but sometimes our clients and our design directors, or even us, maybe have a hard time understanding and presenting in 2D like this. So then we decide to build a physical model and then ask you to get down and imagine yourself being there in the park right there. And that kind of gets successful to a degree. But if that usually doesn't work, we move on to actually building a mock-up, right? All of this, though, can be pretty costly. And not that these are going to go away. These are still really, really helpful solutions to our design problems. But inevitably, this is our deliverable, right? This is really what the client's paying for. So, and again, sometimes clients have a really hard time looking at drawings and plans, right? Who's ever put a plan down in front of someone and the client's just like, I don't get it. I don't know what I'm looking at. In fact, when I first started at the firm, I had absolutely no idea who Gensler was, and I had no idea what an architecture plan even looked like. So the first time I was like, all right, well, what do I need to do? They're like, model this, and they plop the drawings down in front of me. I'm like, I don't know what I'm looking at. So it can be a little confusing. And so that's where VR and even AR come into play. Like, these tools are going to help drive essentially help drive the bridge of communication between our design intent to what people are expecting to see. And so the real question is, why VR though, right? Is it because it's cool? Is it the new thing? Are we just trying to do it because everyone's talking about it and there's money to be made here? Yes and no, but really, you don't want to use VR just to use it. Like, you really need to have a purpose for it. And so that purpose is experience. Because that's essentially, as designers, what you guys are trying to do. You're trying to design an experience from the get-go. You're trying to tell a story. You're trying to essentially make someone have a feeling around this. Like, everything that we do these days is an experience, from using your phone to riding the subway here to even entering this building and how it was designed. There is some kind of story that you are experiencing every day. And so you don't want to sell just the design to the client. It's really about this. When Steve Jobs made the iPhone, he wasn't trying to make a better phone. He was trying to make a better experience around a phone. And that's essentially what we're doing in architecture. So, with saying that, so experience is at the top. This is really what you're driving. This is what VR is perfect for, because when you put on the headset, you really are getting immersed in that design. A 2D image, an animation, a physical model, and even a small mock-up doesn't really drive this home for anyone. VR helps bring all of that together, because when you put it on, you're expecting to see what you expect to see, because that's what we live in. Which then drives feelings. You're trying to invoke an emotion from someone. This is really the big selling point, right? When you walk into the Oculus down here at One World Trade, it's like, and it was my first time there last night. It was amazing. Like, I couldn't believe it. Like, it was evoking an emotion reaction for me, which is the idea behind our designs. But that then leads to feedback, and this is really important. Somehow, some way, someone is going to react to this, either positive or negatively. Positively is usually what you want, and negative usually tells you there's an issue there that you need to fix. So that's where better design comes in, because you can take that feedback, learn from the mistakes, and improve your design. This is really important during the design process, either just for yourself, for your own internal reviews, and reviews for clients. This all brings value. And this is what the bottom line is. Everyone wants value out of it, because this is where you're either going to save money or you're going to make money. So it's going to bring value to the process, right? Like we were just talking about, you're going to have this feedback, the design loop. You're going to be able to iterate faster, better, stronger, all of that. And using VR at every single point in the design process is going to help this. At no point should you not say, I don't need VR right here. Because with the tools that are available today, there's no reason not to. It's super easy. As we just saw, how easy was it to render a VR image out of SketchUp and Rhino now using V-Ray? It was like super simple, 2 clicks. I mean, I've been in this industry long enough, like I have not seen technology like this adapt that fast and easy. So after that, it's going to bring value to the design. Good example is like, what if you're designing a room and you need to decide between 8-foot and 10-foot ceilings? Looking at a 2D viewport, you're not really going to get a good representation of feel of what that space is going to feel like unless you're using VR. And then it brings value to the client, because you may have already gone through a lot of design iterations that you didn't need to bring to their attention because you've already solved it in VR first. You can still tell them about it, but you've already gone and saved that money. And then even then too, if you're starting to do options in VR, things of that nature, you're starting to solve issues that the client can understand easier and solve them before they become bigger issues during, like, say, construction, when all of a sudden it's like, whoa, this 10-foot ceiling doesn't feel right. This needs to come down. But by that point, that's a very costly mistake. So you're starting to save money early on in the design process by using all of this. And then this eventually brings value to the consumer. Who's consuming this at the end of the day? All right. So at the end of the day, though, it's not about the hardware. And I know a lot of us like to geek out about hardware. I'm being one of them. If you want to talk hardware after this, I can talk your ear off, no doubt. But really, it comes down to, again, the client and the experience that you're trying to sell. Okay? And this is really, really important, because this is where VR, if you're trying to sell VR, if you're using VR, this is where the biggest value comes into play. When you can have this kind of conversation with someone, it just makes life so much easier in the process. I have seen meetings go from hours to 30 minutes because of VR, where it's like, put this on and tell me what you think of the ceiling height. On, oh, I like it, that's great. Off, I have my design decision, right? It's just, it helps so much. So again, the value comes from designing the experience. So at Gensler, we took that to heart, and we decided to make our own sort of like VR platform that we've started. And this initially started as a Google Cardboard app, and we even actually designed our own, or custom branded one. This is a brand called Palace that we ended up designing with. And it's a mobile app. You can actually download it on your phone if you want to check out a demo version of it. We have a couple projects up. But essentially, we are adding a desktop client to everyone's computer that they can click and drag their renderings into and upload them to the cloud and automatically download them to the app when they log in with their user ID. And it's a very simple app right now where it's got a few hotspots that you can then look at, and after about 2 seconds, it'll pop you to another view and then another view. And we're using this across, again, the entire board. We're using it early and conceptual, and we're even allowing our clients to do custom branding with our app to then do their own experiences at like trade shows, or when they open a new space, they can deliver the app to their employees for them to take a look at. So it's become very, very versatile. VR has become a very versatile product for us at Gensler. And there are essentially 2 main types that we're really experimenting with. We've got the single point 360s, as we call them, which are pretty much the VR images that you can get out of V-Ray right now. And then we do a lot of room scale VR, which is what you can do with an Oculus or an HTC Vive. There is a third type coming called light fields. And you may have heard this little term flying around and buzzing around with some other people. But Chaos Group has partnered with Lytro, and they actually just showed this off for the first time last week at a conference in Venice called I Am Arc. It was the first architectural-specific VR conference, so we weren't really talking about anything else but visualization there. And this is Christopher Nichols, the president of Chaos Group Labs, showing this off. And what light fields are is they're volumetric rendering. So now you're doing a 360 rendering, but you can actually move around a defined space. This is by far the most immersive VR I have ever seen, because not only are you getting the ability to walk around you also get the additional benefits of all the ray tracing quality that V-Ray brings to it. So when you merge those two together, it's outstanding. However, this is still very, very experimental and super computational heavy. I think Lytro told me they had 15 SSDs in a RAID array to run just this one demo. Okay, so very, very power consuming at the moment, but as we all know, as time goes on, technology gets better and faster, and next thing you know, we are going to be rendering these as our primary form of VR. So I'm going to get into workflow a little bit, and some of this was already talked about today, but this is it. It's really that simple. If you're working in any of these major design applications and you're using V-Ray like we do at Gensler, it's 2 or 3 clicks, and you can generate a single image, you can generate the sphericals, or you can generate the cubes. And that's about it. Now, anyone use 3 Studio Max here? Couple? Okay, this is for you. Anyone using 3.4, 3.5? Couple? Okay. This is the best advice I can give you if you're using the new ones. Use the defaults. Okay, and I'm not even kidding. Like the work that has gone into, and this is, you can see it, what we just saw in Rhino and SketchUp and Revit, is that V-Ray now has actually automated and figured out how to handle a lot of the old settings on its own already. I can't tell you that I have taken a lot of my older scene files and I've upgraded them to the newer settings, and I've shaved 40 minutes off the rendering time just by using the defaults alone. Okay, so I highly recommend that take what you know about V-Ray, throw it out the window, and play around with the defaults and then start tweaking from there. The only other setting you need to actually worry about inside of 3 Studio Max is the dynamic memory limit, because this is still set to 400 megabytes by default. And that'll cause you a lot of issues as soon as you start putting in proxies and doing displacement and things like that. So actually set that to 0, and then V-Ray is going to figure everything out on its own. In Rhino, Revit, and SketchUp, that's actually set to 0 in the background by default, and that setting isn't even there anymore. But I just wanted to point that out. This is going to be like my one main V-Ray tip for the day. So there are 3 things to keep in mind when designing for VR. The first thing is you will need to design everything, because you don't know if your client's going to decide to look off to the left or the right or behind them or at his feet, which is actually usually the first thing people do when they try VR for the first time. They look down. I don't know why. Second thing is you need to place the viewpoint where, again, someone's going to experience something. Usually when we do renderings, we tend to put the camera in the corner and we set it like this, and it's like, okay, give me a wide field of view, and I'm going to render that. With VR, that's not going to work well, because then you're going to have a wall behind you, and that's just not exciting. So make sure you look at your space, see where things are interesting, and make sure that's where you place your VR camera, because you want to engage someone when they're looking at a VR rendering. And then, of course, more pixels equals more times. VR renderings are probably much larger than you're used to rendering. The recommended resolution for a cube map is essentially 18,000 pixels on the long side. So if you're used to rendering just 1080p, that's essentially, what, 12 times more than that? So keep in mind that's going to equal more rendering power, but thankfully we have things like Swarm now that you can essentially disseminate across your network in your office and add additional rendering power there. But again, these are usually, when people ask me what's the workflow to do VR, it's just these 3 things. Because you're already doing everything else. You're already setting up your lights, you're already modeling, and you're already setting up your materials the same way you would like just a single rendering, except now you just have to hit the 2 checkboxes to turn VR on. So these are just the 3 things that you need to keep in mind when working that way. And here are a few of our lessons learned when working inside of, or working with virtual reality. We've learned it produces better 3D models. Designers who aren't used to rendering or who like to cut corners when modeling, especially in Revit, can't tell you how many models I used to get out of Revit that had no floors. Because people would work in just a 2D view, and it's like, why do I need a model of floor? It's going to be white in my document. I'm like, because I need the floor. But it produces better models, and now designers are starting to look at their soffits, for instance. That's usually one place that I always see that gets cleaned up quickly, is that they don't model how the soffit walls come together properly, and then when they render a VR image and they look up and there's a gaping hole with sunlight coming through, they fix it really quickly. And so this has been really, really helpful for some of us who do just mainly visualization or taking models from designers. Spherical renderings are ideal for video, though I don't really ever recommend you doing VR animation. They're like roller coasters for people, and you're either going too fast or too slow, and it's really dependent on the person. And usually by the time, your client's got the VR headset on and the roller coaster's going, they want to stop and look at something, but by the time they get to fumble with the headset and stop the video, they're past it, and it just derails the entire presentation. So I don't really recommend doing VR unless you're maybe doing video with actual cameras. But even then, I tend to stay away from that. The cube maps do make the best still renderings, though. There's something about those like high resolution. You're essentially doing a 15,000 by 15,000 render per box. That's why they end up being 18K on the long side, because you're doing it also twice for stereoscopic. But the resolution and the way the maps get blended just looks a lot better. And then don't put objects too close to people's faces. They tend to freak out and makes them uneasy because the brain is triggering, I know nothing's in front of me, but it looks like something's in front of me. So that's also another really quick way to derail a conversation with a client is they'll just get uneasy and then they're going to want to take the headset off and then you're done. Yeah, game over. Don't place users on top of anything. So if I were to do a VR rendering and put the camera on top of this table, people tend to freak out because they know they're not standing on the table, and then they imagine the table's inside of them. And again, you're just creating an uneasy environment for them, and you don't want to do that to a client. You can do it to a friend if you want to freak them out real quick. Like that's always fun. And then keeping the camera at 5'6". It seems to be a really, really good average height because people, plus or minus 4 inches from that can make that difference in their heads. They feel okay looking at a static VR image this way. You don't really get this issue with like room scale VR because the headset gets tracked at the height that that person's at. But for like a Gear VR, 5'6" works really well. You don't feel too high and too short. We found putting the camera at 6 foot, for instance, people who are shorter than that they feel a little uneasy again because they're not used to that height range. And same thing if you go too low. Has anyone tried like the IKEA VR demo in the HTC, by the way? Has anyone done that? One, okay, great. So they actually did this though, which was really cool though, but you could actually turn yourself into a cat. And so you get like, they rescale the entire thing, which is actually a really cool experiment. And then there's like a ghost of a cat where you can like take the controller and jump around. And then they also have it at child height too, which was really cool. So you can actually see how the design looks to your kids. Play around with that if you can. It's a really interesting experiment that they did, and it works really well. But when you're in a client meeting with a Gear VR, I don't recommend doing that. And then force, but don't force people to look around. And what I mean is like start some older illustrative techniques where adding key lights in some areas or oversaturating some. They do and they don't work, but just kind of play with it. And you really want to inspire someone to look around your space. And so really play around with adding people or figures or something that's helping point someone's eye to move around the space. That works really well. And then we found mobile VR is still the ideal solution for presentations, which let's talk about presenting to clients because that's what we're going to be doing for the most part with a lot of this stuff. Keeping in mind, most clients still haven't experienced VR. We've learned this. I can't tell you how many presentations in the past month of VR to clients that still have not to this day experienced it. So with that being said, younger clients and younger people seem to adapt to VR much quicker than the older clients. So keep in mind the age range of who you're presenting to and practice. Practice, because I've seen all kinds of things when it comes to clients and how they handle the headset. Some clients will refuse to put it on for a variety of reasons. One, they may not want to look stupid in front of their employees, especially CEOs. We've learned that quite a bit. Two, they don't want to mess up their hair. That's another one. Three is makeup as well for the ladies. A lot of real reasons. So always have a plan B for that. But really, removing the headband or head strap from the Gear VR sometimes helps because, again, they're afraid to do this. And so they're much, much more comfortable, especially if it's their first time, because what they're going to want to do, they're going to be too afraid to whatever's going to happen. They're going to want to pull it away from their face real quick. So having the headband removed is ideal for this, especially you don't have this issue too much with like Google Cardboard because it is just like a piece of cardboard. But with like the Gear VR, we've learned that some clients, we just want to take the headband off. And then if they feel like they want the headband, we'll put it back on for them. Let's see. And then, again, you want to sell the experience of VR and not the technology to clients. We've learned that if we just go, hey, check out all this cool stuff, like they're like, oh, yeah, that's nice. but if you're like, can you quickly take a look in this viewer and take a look at the staircase and see if you like the material and the treads and how it's spiraling? They seem more applicable if you do the latter, to put VR on for the first time if you're having trouble getting someone in there. So what's coming next to VR? And I'll give you a small hint. It's collaboration. And in fact, it's pretty much already here for the most part. I would be surprised that if a majority of these more interactive VR applications that are hitting the market don't have collaboration by the end of the year. I feel like they're probably going to be a little behind. We are doing something called VR Jams at Gensler. So every Wednesday afternoon, we get about 21 offices participating where we host a project review or tour in VR using a Revit model and an application called Fuser. And so this has been really cool because now we can, again, in the firm, check out what everyone's doing, and we can all do it in VR and do design reviews that way as well. And it's been working out really, really well for us. And so we'll talk about some case studies now. First one being the Los Angeles Football Club right outside of LA, downtown LA. And this is probably one of the first projects we really started using VR to help in the design process and figure out where a client wanted something. And so the big issue is where do we put the big LCD screen, right? That's a pretty big important component of a stadium. And we were showing 2D renderings and plans, and the client wasn't quite getting it. Like, they kind of knew, but it just wasn't clicking. And so we went, okay, come back tomorrow, and we're gonna render we're gonna render VR images out tomorrow for you. And they came back, and we did a series of images, like one in the middle of the pitch, one in the president's box, a couple in the seats, a couple from like one of the big entryways over there, and essentially was allowed the client to scroll through and see where all the different locations. We put the LCD screen in every single location in the rendering. And 5 minutes, he was like, that one right there. Right? That was a week worth of trying to come up with these plans and these renderings and spending an hour or two with him in a meeting, not getting anywhere, and within about 5 minutes the next day, design decision was made. So we realized at that point that this tool for us as architects is not going away. It may fail in gaming or in entertainment, but for architects, I feel like this tool is it's here to stay. And so then after that, we had another big project out of Houston called the Texas Medical Center. For those of you who don't know what the Texas Medical Center is, it's pretty much another city in Houston that is just essentially hospitals and research. This is a world-renowned area that if anyone has any cancer research that needs to be done, any kind of experimental medical procedures that no one else really does, it's pretty much located in Houston. So this is actually a really big deal for the city, because they're looking to expand and create this sort of nexus of bringing all of this information together, which is why this building right here kind of looks like a DNA helix, and it's a pretty cool design. Here it is more from an aerial shot. And so when we were working on this, again, we wanted to sell that experience to the client, because how do you sell an experience of this crazy helix-looking thing to someone in just still renderings? I mean, and you can, and these look really, really beautiful, but really, like, again, since we all know what VR feels like, sitting in one of these renderings is just outstanding. Like, you really feel like you get there. And so what the client really wanted to do is that they needed to sell this idea to the city. And so the Super Bowl was here this past February, I'm sorry. And there was this big, like, technology expo going along with the Super Bowl. And so TMC wanted to have a booth there, and so we made a beautiful physical model. We did animations, we did still renderings, but we also did a ton of virtual reality. And so as people came through the booth, we were giving them headsets. They could check out the VR, they could take a look at the model, they could get a really feel of a sense of what Texas Medical Center was really trying to do, and it was a massive hit for everyone. And so on that note, remember, the value comes from designing the experience, and I'll open up to questions, if anyone has any. One. All right, crickets.
You kind of touched on that and almost answered it. I've kind of had the same experience with the VR and the cardboard and the head strap and all of that. Especially, going in. Oh, sorry. Especially going into the full tethered thing with CEOs, principal levels there, not the millennials that pick up on that quickly. Can you elaborate on that? I've actually found that the cardboard is the most accessible, even more than the Gear VR, because it still gives you that little peripheral sense of I am in the real world. It's not the fully immersive thing. So my 75-year-old principal preferred the cardboard over the Gear because he still got that feeling of what's your experience on that?
Yeah, no, we've seen that too. Sometimes if we've got a client who ends up working that way, we'll switch over to a cardboard device as quickly as we can. Again, kind of having that plan B. If you can have one on hand ready to go, that's a good idea. I haven't seen too many clients not like the Gear VR though. They on our end they've just reciprocated very well to it, but there have been a few that for some reason like the padding and the unit itself it's too much for them, and so switching over to something like I showed you that Powis device we had has worked really well. And then a company called Homido makes actually a really nice little one. I wish I had a picture of it, but it's like this little piece of plastic with two lenses that fold and compact. Oh yeah, all right. So if you want to see it, yeah, they've got one. Actually, that's by far, I think, my favorite device now. I probably shouldn't say that, but it's a really, really good design, and it's something you can like slip into your pocket real quick, and I haven't seen anyone get intimidated by that, and it's super easy to like look through. So there are a lot of really cool cardboard options out there too, in case you don't want anything that feels too cardboard-like, which, again, some clients too, you put that in front of them, and they're like, this is cheap, why are you putting this in front of me? Which is usually why we start with the Gear VR, because it is a really nice, well-designed looking device, and so most of our clients tend to go that way since we're a design firm. But every now and then you'll get, it's hard to judge. It's, unless you know your client really well, that's where you want to have like a plan B and potentially a plan C in place.
Thank you very much. Actually, maybe before we take another question, just wanted to get a show of hands over here. Who's using VR right now in your firm? Oh, great show of hands. So thanks. And then just curious to find out how many of you use the Oculus Rift. That's where it was? Okay. And this is, by the way, this is the Gear Homido, Homido. I believe it's available in Amazon as well. But if you wanted to see the Gear and Oculus Rift or the Google Cardboard, Iris VR is back there. You can see it on their desk too.
We have Homido, and we have an example that we built and we presented to 40 people on site on a tour. And we have used Homido in that, and we've seen 40 people who have never used VR, who were just, very impressed by using this and not intimidated. So we have an example if anyone is interested to take a look at it with the Homido.
Thank you. Can I share this later on? Yeah. Great, thanks. Hold on a second.
Hi, my name is Roman. I just had a question regarding, you talked a lot about virtual reality. Has Gensler made any efforts, or are you pursuing any augmented reality solutions?
Okay, well, I had a few slides queued up just in case someone either A, asked me that, or B, I was running short on time, and I'm not running short on time. So, yes, so we're very much using quite a bit of the HoloLens around the firm, but we've also partnered with Meta, and we're looking at other devices as well. So we partnered really early on last year with Trimble to help create their SketchUp viewer for HoloLens. And so this right here is a video, and before I play, I'll give you a little background. Our LA office sits in sort of like this 3 or 4 story, what we call Jewel Box Square in downtown LA, and it's surrounded by 2 towers. And we were expanding our campus into one of the towers, so we wanted to build a sky bridge from the top floor of the Jewel Box over and then outfit a new space for the rest of our employees. And so with that, we took our Revit model and we put it into the HoloLens through their SketchUp viewer, and we put it in place in the existing space. So before this gets blown out to be an outdoor patio with the sky bridge, we're actually inside, and you're going to see chairs and stuff in a second. But this is my colleague, Alan, walking around the LA office using the HoloLens with the model in place. And so here's the sky bridge. You can see the sky bridge going across, but it's now dead ending into a wall that has project work and there's tables. But it's giving us a really good idea of where the beams are going to go, how they're looking, things like that. And we put this in, we ended up putting this on our there I am. We ended up putting this on our managing principal in the office, and he immediately went into design mode. He's like, "Is that glass there really 6 feet? Is that where that beam's really going to go? Is that what that door likes?" And thankfully the designers were there, and they started writing everything he was saying down. But again, it's just being an amazing design tool that way. When you can actually walk around a physical space with the model in there, I mean, augmented reality is going to be a huge part in that. And so after that, a couple of months later, at the construction site, so now we're standing on the other side, and that's where we were. Let me just rewind. Like that space back there where that white beam is where we were just standing in the last video. Okay, so you can see it's been blown out now. We're across the tower in the new space while it's under construction, and that's spoilers. Come on, here we go. So you can see very much a construction site. If I just skip ahead real quick. And so now Alan enables the SketchUp model, and we can see it pop into place. And now he can actually walk around the construction site with his HoloLens on and see the design and the model in place. Even though it's relatively really simple, this is big. Like this is actually really amazing to do in person. And so this technology is only going to get better. And then this is the final product after the design's been completed. So pretty close. One other thing we've been doing is we've also been working with another company called Umbra. And Umbra is known in the gaming industry for creating technology around level-on-demand geometry for gaming engines. And we've been working with them to create a Revit to HoloLens link. And so this is a prototype of that, where that LAFC stadium I showed you earlier, that's the entire 600 megabyte Revit model in the HoloLens, which is huge because for SketchUp, we have like a 15 megabyte limit on your file to get a SketchUp model. Because the HoloLens is a complete computer. It's a mobile device like your phone. I think it's about the powerful as a Samsung S7 or S6, like one of those two. So imagine putting a 600 megabyte Revit file on your mobile device is pretty much what this is. And so you can see that as Alan gets closer to some of the geometry, you can see it starts to res up a little bit. And he's going to start peeking into some of the boxes now. So that's something else we've been doing with augmented reality. Other things we've been doing is we've looked at what does the workspace of the future look like with augmented reality? Because we're hoping that augmented reality becomes a very common thing to everyone. And so what happens if we remove all the monitors on your desk and you no longer have actual displays, but you can turn on different desktops with your glasses, for instance? And so maybe you've got a computer under your desk hidden somewhere, but on top of it, you actually have zero display space. Oops. Yeah, so that's kind of what we've been doing in and around augmented reality as well.
That's excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I know we have some questions from Facebook Live as well, and we'll queue that up later on. We might have to get back to you. And for others, they were asking whether this would be available. Just wanted to let you know we'll be sharing the recording with you later on Facebook as well. Do you have any other questions, or how we're doing in time?
I just want to let everybody know too, Iris VR is in the back corner over there. If you want to check out some of the VR stuff that those guys are working on, we asked them to come join us today so you can experience what they're working on. So.
And if you want to talk anything technical, V-Ray or any of this other stuff, just hit me up today. I'll be more than happy to talk about that too. So.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
And I know we had to switch presentations earlier on, and I think there was a bit of a confusion if you didn't hear it. We had to do the Scott's presentation earlier, so we're going to hear back from Constantine, okay? And then we'll hear from Mike from Cooper Carry at 12:10. Great, thank you.
So how much time do I have? No, I mean for the talk. I mean.